Okay, preparing the palette to paint the eye, and I like to keep my lights on one end of the palette, my whites. First thing I like to do is mix my highlights, which I'm doing. I'll do a little bit of Naples yellow into one, and then I'll get kind of a pinkish one using maybe something like cad red light or even magenta. And I got my blacks on the other end of the palette. And another color I like to mix I call mint green, and I'll mix Naples yellow with phthalo green. That's what I'm doing right now. I'm mixing kind of a mint green, kind of a light, it's kind of a neutral color I can use for mixing into other colors as a passing tone as well. It's kind of I like to keep it on the cool side a little bit. I'm just checking my colors still a little bit here. I'm mixing a little bit of a light ultramarine blue color that I'll be using as well. Okay, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to start out with the gesture. And when I'm doing the gesture of the eye, usually the first thing I like to do is get that first cast shadow underneath the eyelid on top. And I'll do that with a violet. Usually mix my violet, a little bit of ultramarine blue with magenta. And get that a little bit on the dark side and just indicate where the lower lid will go, and then I also indicate where the iris is going to go. Okay, I put in my upper eyelid. Okay, and just kind of start widening my shadows. This is still the gesture phase, the early part of drawing or painting the eye. Basically drawing it at this stage, we're just using paint as the pigment. Okay. Alright, and as I'm doing this, I'm going to put a few values in using a little bit of white just to get a little bit of locate a little bit of my value. Okay, and I'm going to pay attention to where the shadows are falling on the eye. That's going to determine basically the shapes I'm going to put in. Okay. Now when you do the eyes, think of spokes going toward the pupil. I've got the pupil in, it's pretty dark. Now I'm getting some of my magenta, getting a little bit of a reddish cast to parts of the eye, like the corners of the eye in magenta. Okay, I'm going to deepen these shadows a little bit, going over the upper eyelid, and I'm going to bring in some of the values of the muscle above the eye, part of the orbital muscle. Okay, I'm going in with a darker value, maybe something on the cool side. I'm just going to be going back and forth with a warm and cool color. Now in here, I might put a little bit of even that mint green color, just to get a little bit of color in the white of the eye. And remember, the white of the eye is not white. It is going to be a mixture of some of the colors I'm introducing here, such as magenta mixed with a little ultramarine blue maybe, or even that mint green. Okay, I'm putting some value on the lower eyelid. I'm a little bit too light for the moment, but that'll settle down in a minute. Now as basically the muscle above the eyelid begins to go up toward the upper eyebrow, it becomes lighter if the light source is coming from above. Okay, get a little darker in here. Okay, now I'm going to start to put in a little bit more value on the iris part of the eye. And some of this I'm blending as I go. I'm blending into the edges, trying to keep my edges a little bit soft as I go. I don't want anything to be overly hard. And I mix in a lot of these violets, and I'll begin to deepen them as I begin to progress with the eye. Putting in a little bit more violet under the eye, lower eyelid. Getting a little darker and introducing a little bit more ultramarine to the inner part of the eye. Keeping it dark, and then I'm beginning to darken and deepen the shadows. It's always adjustment after adjustment after adjustment. You just keep adjusting one after the other. Okay, now as I begin to add more of these violets, I'll go back and sometimes pick up a little bit more of that mint green and put that into it as well. And I keep going back to the magenta, getting a little more magenta. Okay, basically beginning to refine. I'm already into the certain refinement phases. I'm kind of jumping around a little bit on this eye, going from one phase to the other. And so I am working on getting the value still correct. Okay. All right, some of these shots, I know it's hard to see what I'm putting in here. Okay, I'm adding light right on top of the eyelid. Right on top of the eyelid, I'm adding light again. And I've already softened that dark shadow that's below it, but I'm adding a little more light to it, gradually adding more depth to the shadows. I'm taking the magenta and I'm almost pulling it in toward the dark part of the iris right now. It's a little hard to see here, but that's what I'm doing. The magenta adds kind of a natural red value to the eye itself. And now I'm putting some light inside the iris coming off of the pupil, and I'll put it right against the edge of the pupil and pull down. Okay, here we can see it pretty good. I'm putting right against the pupil and pull down. Okay, I'm going to darken the brow a little bit here. Just going off here. I'll get a little bit more value outside of the eye so you can kind of see the shape of the eye itself. Okay, I'm reaching for some of the combination of the magenta with a little bits of the mint green added to it to give it a little more natural fleshy color. And I'm doing this on tone canvas to begin with, so it's all coming out as relatively natural color. Not really mixing a flesh tone, just mixing these colors together because they're somewhat complementary anyway. Okay, now I'm going to deepen some of the value, make it a little darker just underneath the light. Okay, I'm getting ready to put the highlight in. Now I'm going to drop it in right below the cast shadow at right on top of the pupil, right there. I'm going to pop that highlight in. There it is. And I'll pop a couple more in the corner. One in the corner, maybe one at the bottom. I call these, anywhere it's wet, I call these juicies. And I'm going to pop, just kind of blend my color, drop a little more color in, and I'm going to flare a little more color out from the pupil to the outside of the iris, which should be darker. Okay, and that's what I'm doing right now. Just going to barely tap it. Getting ready to put in some eyelashes in a minute. Now the eyelashes will go in last, basically the last part of what we're doing. Just flare it out. Just set it down on there and flare it out. I like to start with maybe a magenta color, not with black. Flare that out after I have my light in, and then I'll darken the shadows, darken the eyelashes at this point. I'm putting a little bit of lash color here too, and at that on the bottom I'll just stay mostly with magenta on top after I have the magenta, and then I'll put in a little bit of black just in a few places on the lashes. Just push down and pull off. At the the top of the eye, you'll see the highlight right underneath the cast shadow, and in the corner of the eye you'll see another possible highlight. That could be what I call a juicy, where there could be some water. Other places, there are maybe one or two other places you'll see a little bit of highlight in the eye itself, and that's caused from the water. And you should also see just a tinge of alizarin crimson around the outside of the pupil, just ever slight amount, and also a nice strong cast shadow above if the light source is coming from above.